Welcome to Autism ADHD TV. It is the place to be for parents and professionals. I'm your host, Holly Blanc Moses, the mom psychologist who gets it. We dive into all kinds of important information like behavior, social skills, and learning. All right, let's get started. Welcome, Dr. Emily King, back to the Autism ADHD podcast.
Thanks for having me, Holly.
I am thrilled that you're back to talk to us. We have a very important topic that we're going to dive into, but before then, I'm going to introduce you. Dr. Emily King is a child psychologist who's worked with neurodivergent children and teens for the last 20 years. She is also the founder of Learn with Dr. Emily, where she shares online resources related to raising and educating neurodivergent youth. She has been featured on MSNBC's Morning Joe, has been quoted in the New York Times and the Washington Post, and has written for parents.com. Dr. Emily is passionate about empowering parents and teachers to take care of themselves so they can grow into the adult that every neurodivergent child needs in their life. She and her husband are parents to two boys who are her greatest teachers. And I love that because my two boys are also my greatest teachers. Okay.
Let's get to it. I'm excited to talk with you today.
It's so exciting. Great topic is we need to stop saying kids are non-compliant in school. And we hear it all the time, right? Mm-hmm. So we're going to figure out reasons why we hear it, why we're responding that way, and what we can do better.
And the pushback I sometimes get from people is that, well, they're not complying. That is what they're not doing. And I get that. However, I think that the description and the words that we use matter. And this could be different in different cultures. It could be different across the United States, but where I am in the South, where everyone needs to just kind of suck up their feelings and act like everything's okay. When you are non-compliant, it can be seen as disrespectful. That's another thing we'll hear of this child is disrespecting my authority, things like that. So I'm using this in a pretty generalized sense of the word. And when we think of children who do not do what is asked of them, many of us have been conditioned because we were raised this way to think that, again, that is a disrespectful thing, or that is, we maybe are, pushing back because we're, quote unquote, giving a parent attitude or giving a teacher attitude or things like that. So for some children, they need clear boundaries. They need to understand what's expected of them, and they need to trust the parent or teacher who's asking that of them. And that's all you need. But for all the kids that I work with, we also have usually a skill weakness and high anxiety, which is going to look like pushback. So I just want to inspire everyone to think about this a little bit differently. Technically, yes, they are, by definition of the word, not complying. However, calling a child non-compliant insinuates to me, and my use of the word, that it is an intentional choice to know what's expected of you and not do the thing. The kids that I work with, this is not an intentional response. It is a stress response. And we need to figure out how to tell the difference. And I would even say, for some kids, it's a stress response. For some kids, it's like a coping strategy. Like, I'm not fully stressed out, but I don't like this thing, so I'm going to avoid it, not comply with it, or avoid it and kind of see what happens. And there's still, skill building to do there too. So I just want us to think more openly, more flexibly about this word, and understand that just labeling a child or stating a child as non-compliant is not going to fix the problem, and it's not going to help the child engage or therefore comply with what's being asked of them. So I want us to just expand the words we use to describe kids and get curious about why they're not getting started or engaging with something, so that we don't just shut down the situation by saying, oh, they're non-compliant, I don't know what to do, and throw your hands up.
Okay, you just covered, as usual, 100 things that I always tell you that. All right, Emily, let's break it down. So
Yep.
At the beginning, you were talking about our feelings as whether you're a parent, an educator, is it's uncomfortable for us when children are not doing what we say. Right. So especially busy teachers, because they are managing a classroom full of kids, like they have curriculums to get through. I mean, there's a lot going on there. So they are managing all these little humans or teens, right? And they are having feelings of their own. They are also human, turns out, teachers, right? We think that they're supposed to not have any feelings about anything, but they straight up do, because they're people. So when we feel or when we experience this discomfort with a kid saying, nope, or not doing it, or whatever, you're going to have some kind of feeling about that, right? Like, again, parents do too. This is uncomfortable. This isn't what you're supposed to do. And it does feel disrespectful. Like you were saying, no, this isn't what's supposed to happen. I tell you what to do and you do it. So if you give me attitude, like you said, which is really something I hear a lot, is they're being disrespectful. That's really hard, especially for the kids that you and I support, because what does that even mean? Right? Like kids don't even know what that really means. And every time I talk to someone, they give me a different answer of what respect means to them too. So it does get a little bit tricky. And also you're giving me attitude. I don't know what that really means either. And it just gets tricky because we're not telling what we need from them. We're telling them what they're doing wrong. And oftentimes that's what kids are feeling. You know, the teacher is stressed, the parent is stressed, the child is stressed, and everybody is stressed. And it's not going to work out real well. If
no one can learn when everybody is stressed. And this is one of the reasons that teachers and parents struggle to problem solve in this moment. When a child is, quote unquote, throwing their emotions at you with their tone, with their volume, maybe with their body, with objects, you know, anytime that a child is dysregulated and exploding emotionally, it's incredibly hard to stay regulated ourselves. So we tend to kind of shut down. Either we shut down our emotional part and we go on autopilot, which is why a lot of old like patterns come out. Any parent listening is like, oh, I sound like my mother when I'm trying to parent in this stressful moment. That's because an old autopilot pattern is coming out of your mouth, or you're just repeating something because all your body is doing is protecting you from these feelings. I think teachers go to a place of, okay, how have I been taught to deal with this professionally? And you go to your training and what you've been taught. And a lot of the strategies and the behavioral, structure and responses that we have, they teach kids what's expected of them and what will happen if they do the positive behavior. But what we're missing there is that when this is a stress response, there is no amount of sticker or points or fun Friday activities that is going to get that child out from under the table, because their brain is hijacked and is in complete protection mode. Or, running away from the classroom could be an unsafe behavior, for instance, but they're in fight or flight. So there's no teaching that can happen. We have to reverse engineer it, get ahead of it, and figure out, why is the child doing this? What is the expectation I've placed on them that's alerted their nervous system into fear mode? And then plan a response that way, instead of, like you said, the perfect storm of the student being stressed and the teacher getting stressed, and then the teachers, pulling from all of the training that they have, yet, like you said, they have, 20 some other students in the class as well. So it's a hard situation in classrooms, especially. And that's why I'm so passionate about supporting teachers and teaching them strategies in these situations, because you have to have these this toolkit kind of on autopilot, because you will have an emotional reaction when kids are upset in your presence. There's no way not to, because you're, like you said, you're a human with a nervous system.
Exactly. And I like how you were talking about that. I think sometimes we have to imagine what it might be like for that child instead of, again, the default that comes in. I would never act like that. And especially even a parent sometimes. I mean, you and I have talked about this before. What comes up for me is like, oh my goodness, my dad would have my stuff out on the front lawn.
Mm-hmm.
If this happened, but we really have to be mindful about what we're experiencing too. And like you were saying, kind of being curious and being open and being flexible. So when I think about how would my nervous system feel, how would I feel in the moment if I was in the middle of the road and a car was barreling down at me? If somebody was to say, okay, you need to do these math problems, chances are I'm not going to be able to do that because I feel like I am going to be seriously injured. Like my body is giving me these signals of how do I protect myself? How do I survive? And so I think we really need to almost, as much as we can, imagine what it would be like for them to feel this way, even though we feel like it's safe, it's a classroom. I'm not asking them to do something that's a big deal, but it is for them. It's
right.
real.
So we think that they, quote unquote, should be able to, or all the other students are doing it, so why can't they? And this is why we need to go back and, make sure we have all the data and looking through what are a child's skills in terms of processing and memory and anxiety, because anxiety is going to hijack their ability to get started and to connect with teachers, and then executive functioning. There are skill weaknesses in there that we need to support that we may not have as adults, or their peers may not have as their classmates. And so a math worksheet to one kid is not going to elicit that unsafe response while it does to another. Or a child absolutely might be able to whiz right through a math worksheet and get started, and then crawls under the table every time you ask them to write. So that's incredibly important data there. Something is happening that's breaking down when we ask them to write. Writing is an incredibly complex task. And so though all the behaviors we see are signals for something isn't feeling capable for this student. And what is it going to be? Yes, they are not getting started, but why? And when we just say, oh, they're not complying, we tend to, in our culture, feel like they're just being, quote unquote, difficult. They're not being difficult. Yes, it feels that way, but they have a skill weakness we need to support. And if we just rely on our messaging of, how we feel, and if we feel like we're out of ideas, then we need to reach out for help. And, this is all the work we do in talking with parents and teachers, is brainstorming how to better support kids. If there's a behavior or a pattern that we can't figure out, I truly believe there's always a pattern. I work with teachers all the time that are like, every day is different. I can never figure out what's happening. And usually that means the pattern is internal in some way, like it's related to sleep or fatigue, or they're constipated. It could be any of these things that we can't see, that we really need to collaborate with the parent and ask what's going on kind of medically and with their physical body. Because if they're having trouble regulating their physical needs, then they probably don't have stamina left over when we ask them to do something that's hard in the classroom. So those are all reasons for good parent-teacher collaboration too.
Yeah, and it really does have to be there. And, it's not easy to always do that because everyone is busy, but that can be an absolute game changer. Again, if a child is in pain, they're also not going to be in a situation where they're going to be able to think through a problem or an assignment. And again, there's so many variables. And I think that's where it gets confusing and overwhelming sometimes, because if we're not thinking it through, our default setting again is going to be they're choosing not to, right? They're just being difficult. And that's not it. I mean, I would challenge, I don't know how you feel about this, Emily, but even if someone did have the possible skill in that moment, there's other reasons why they are not doing it. To me, there's always a reason.
Right.
So when we figure that out, when you said the word why, and that's an important small word that we can't forget, that's where the solution lies, is the why. And if we don't take the time and figure that out, we're just blaming the child. They already feel bad.
Mm-hmm.
And then now everything is their fault, even though they, in a lot of ways, can't help it, right? So that doesn't really set a good experience for the child in learning, and the parent and the teacher. So, when we're all on the same team and let the child know we care about them, like we want to support them in the way they learn. And
yeah, so I also want to talk a little bit about the word choices. So we say a lot and I think we say a lot about like, you're not making safe choices to a student. And I think this evolved out of, it's a little better than what I think teachers used to say, which was more blaming of like, stop doing this, stop doing that. It's a kinder way to say it. And I get that, how it's evolved over time. However, for our neurodivergent kids, it's not always a choice. And that's the point I'm making here, that not complying with things, some teachers will say, and some educators, especially administrators, or you're not making safe choices, so we have to do X, Y, and Z. But if it's a stress response, that was the safer choice. Like from the child's perspective, you asked me to write in my journal for an open-ended response, and that was really scary. So my choice was to go under the table. I feel safe under here, and now you're telling me that wasn't the safer choice. So that's not a super great example, because both of those things are actually safe. Or let's say running out of the classroom, for instance. It felt safer out in the hallway than it did in front of my journal prompt, right? So it can be confusing when we use those words, but then also I want to make the point that it is not always a choice. So an example of this, you gave your example of standing in the street and a truck's coming at you, and you're not going to want to be doing a math worksheet right then. So, when I think about fight or flight responses or stress responses, my best example is as a parent, because I think we're all wired to, it's that feeling of like, if we slam on brakes, why does our right arm go out in front of our child when they have a seatbelt on, right? Like we're all have this instinct to like put our arm out if we slam on brakes. And I think about like, if my young child is going to step into the street and not look, and I see a car coming, I'm going to grab my child's arm faster than I even have time to process it or think about it. That is a complete animalistic response of protecting your young, that we are all wired to do that. And kids are wired to protect themselves to a threat. And some of our kids with really, really sensitive nervous systems and high anxiety, academics can feel threatening. And we have to believe them. No, it's not a tiger on the loose, but we have to believe them that something doesn't feel safe. And when my brain is alert and in defense mode, I can't learn, I can't process, I can't make mistakes. I say this a lot, learning is a vulnerable experience. And so we have to create this safety of connection with the teacher, but also making sure they have the skills to get started. So, if we have a knee-jerk reaction to keeping ourselves or our kids safe, that's not a choice. That was a systemic safety response that happened before I was even able to think about it.
Well, and I like how you described it that way. And what my brain was telling me in the moment was about communication. So we have to remember that when you are in this stressful situation when you are surviving, when it's, this automatic response, it's already hard for our kids to communicate what's happening for them. I mean, it's already hard outside of a stressful situation. But if they have their head down, if they tear up the paper, if they take off or go under the desk, like you said, they're also not in a space where they're going to say, this was too hard, this was too overwhelming, so it's really hard in that moment to sometimes regulate ourselves because we don't have this explanation that we need as humans to make sense out of what's happening in the moment. But what we have to do, again, like you said, really check in with ourselves. Yes, maybe the word choice is coming up for me as a human, as a parent, as a teacher. This isn't a choice. Like, we have to really check ourselves before we say it, because not only is this child incredibly stressed, they don't need us to add to their stress, because that's just going to make it all worse, right?
Yeah. So let me give some examples of alternatives in wording. So
Mhm.
I get asked this all the time. Well, what else can we say? So let's say a child, does run out into the hallway. That, you're right, that isn't a safe choice, especially if there's one teacher and the teacher has to then leave the class and then those kids don't have supervision. So I do a lot of body talk with kids to help them separate kind of their mindset as a person versus what their nervous system is trying to do to keep them safe. So things like, I can't see your body when you're out here in the hallway. I need you to stay in the classroom if you're feeling overwhelmed. And then that's a student who the goal would be, we're letting them retreat if they get overwhelmed, but to stay in the room. So that's the goal there. So we need to build in, okay, what are we working on with this child? Okay, they might need to retreat. If a kid is running out of the room, the goal isn't to stay in their seat all the time. Let's baby step it here. So another example would just be validation. If they're still safe, like a child that's under the table or does retreat to like a safe spot in the classroom, to have a plan with that child, and talking with them when they are calm and say, every time you go over there, I see you. They could have a hand signal. They could have like a messaging with the teacher and say, I see you, you stay there as long as you need to. And then I'll check on you and encourage you to come back when you're ready. There's some kids that would stay there and avoid, and there's some kids that will use some strategies to calm down and then initiate coming back. It depends on the student. And so not one of these strategies will work for everyone, but we can say things like, I see you're overwhelmed here. Let me know when you're ready to talk about it. And then just walk away and just let them use their strategies and calm their body and know that they're supported, know that they're safe. And then we will problem solve how to get the work done later.
And I like how you were talking about prioritizing in that moment, right? Because really pushing that work right then, not going to happen.
Not the goal.
It's going to escalate. And even if they shut down in class, they may then end up running out, right? So we really want to just say, okay, let's make sure they know they're safe, period, first, always number one. So I actually recommend the same thing, Emily. And of course, every child is different. Every one of the people that we see is different. But being able to say, okay, you let me know when you're ready. So we're giving them a little bit of control here, which they need, because they feel like probably everything is out of control.
They need to practice that independence of, I am upset or overwhelmed. So I go here in the classroom where I'm safe. This teacher believes me, believes that I'm having this feeling, and trusts me that I'm going to know when my body feels calmer and can come back. Now, if the child does, start to avoid and stays in that safe spot and doesn't come back, that's when we would work with the child on building that trust. I want you to be independent coming back, but you're not quite able to do it on your own yet. So I'm going to come check in with you and we'll come back to your desk together. Or it could be that the student has additional support. So a special education teacher comes in and helps them transition to a smaller group setting, or there are all kinds of ways that we troubleshoot these things. But we have to come up with a way for children to ride that emotional wave. I'm alerted to a trigger. I'm going to either stay on my desk and handle it and calm down, or I'm going to retreat and calm down over here in a safe way. And then we need to teach them what to do when they're ready to come back. Just come on back. And it may be that they've missed the window. If there's like a math block and the class is moving on, they need a plan for, if I missed the teaching time because I was spending all that time upset, that could lead to more anxiety and feeling like they're behind. So we need a plan of like, that's okay. If you miss that time, we're going to put this with your teacher when you go spend time, let's say with a special education teacher. And this is a good example of a time where if a student is consistently missing out on instruction because of overwhelm, that is a good reason that we should be talking about them having an IEP, right? So, it's harder to do if this child doesn't have those support services, but that's a way you can use those support services to help a child come back around and finish that work later that's on their own time of emotional regulation versus just when the teacher says that they should do it.
Definitely. And those are all really important things to consider, because what they're telling us is this isn't working. Like the way we're doing it right now is not working. So again, being kind of curious, being open, being flexible, because oftentimes we want these kids to be flexible, but we need to be flexible, right? If they're like, nope, not doing it. Oh, yes, you are.
Right. So, and I will see so many times that we feel, for some reason, I think it's just culturally, we feel like we are losing control if we don't demand that they do it on our own agenda. But with children with an autism diagnosis, you will get so much more from them if you do it on their time frame and through their interests. It is like magical. And so you just have to shift the way that you think about connecting with, engaging, and teaching these kids. And yes, there are challenges because there's a standardized curriculum, but that's one thing that I help teachers with is, okay, how can we tweak this a little bit to engage in interest, to add some motivation, and then support any skills we have that are weak on getting started independently. And it really can be magical.
It really is. And so I think that it's important for us to recognize that when we feel like we're losing control, we have to remind ourselves this is possible. There are all these amazing creative ways that we can support these kids. It is not impossible, because I think that stresses us, as parents and teachers, because we feel so stuck. Well, they do too. The child does too. So we need to recognize that. So when we go back and think about, you mentioned an IEP, we really have to consider testing. We have to make sure we're not missing any learning differences. We have to consider the communication differences. I mean, there are all these things we need to consider. It is really not at all about this idea of non-compliance. It's about the why and how do we get there and what are the goals. And really, when we come to the table, teachers and parents, they have the same goals, right? And oftentimes the child does too. Like they want to make it work, but they're so overwhelmed and it's not set up for them, right? So to learn. And that's why it's important for us to individually know these kids and what they need. It may be an issue of a child needs to go to, hang out in this more secure, safe area in the classroom. And then you can, give them a little sheet that says it was too hard, too boring, too loud, whatever you're working with them on. It's amazing when we let them be the teacher, how far we can get.
Absolutely. And you're reminding me of the regulation roster, which is what I use with teachers in the fall, which is available all the time, but I usually only talk about it going into the new school year. But I'll ask teachers to observe your kids when you're getting to know them in the fall. And you can tell their temperaments and their regulation strategies, their natural regulation strategies. Some of your kids need to move. They need to stand. They need to move in their space. Some of your kids need structure and they need a list and they need a checklist. Some of them need quiet. Some of them need social. They need a job. They need to be a leader. They need to be a structure within that busyness. Some of them are multiple of those things. So it's just helpful to organize that information. Teachers know all of this. They get to know their kids when they come in the fall, but they are our best teachers because they will tell us what they need and they will show us when we've asked them to do too much. And I always think that we're all kind of talking about the same thing. We just use different words. So teachers say non-compliant, and they're right. A child is literally not complying with the task, but why? Why are they not doing it? And so I just want everyone to think about that word and the word making choices, because stress responses literally are not choices. They are nervous system automatic responses that we have to keep ourselves safe. And some kids do not feel safe when they're asked to do something that exceeds their ability.
Yes. And so really quick, before we wrap up, when you talk about ability, and you and I have talked about this before, it can be confusing when a child maybe completes work similar to what you're asking them to do the next day, right? So they do it one day, but not the next. And sometimes what I'll hear is, I know you can, but you're choosing not to. So that's really something we need to consider, because there are different variables that occur. You know, it could be that, again, we talked about, how are they feeling? How are they sleeping? It could be a med change that we don't know about. I mean, there's so many things to consider. They could be bullied in the classroom and we don't know it. You know, that's happened to my own son before, where the teacher wasn't aware because she was managing so much. She can't see everything and hear everything. And so, you know, there's so many things to consider. It could be that they haven't mastered, again, that skill yet consistently. So what do you think about that?
So I mostly think it's the latter, that anytime a child isn't consistently doing something, it's not fully mastered. And here's what I mean by this. So I like to use the analogy of driving for adults. So there are places, usually it's from home to the office, or from from like my house to my mom's house, like driven there a million times. I could do those drives probably thinking about something else. I'm sick, I'm tired, I'm listening to music. Like there could be like 5 things distracting me, and I will still be able to get my car there successfully. But if you ask me to go somewhere I've never been or only been a few times, and I am tired, or I don't feel well, or I've got a screaming child in the car, some variable, plus I'm not completely solid on that path, I may or may not be able to get there consistently. I may have been able to do it yesterday if I didn't have my kid with me, or I may have been able to do it yesterday if I didn't have a headache. There are all these things that change our ability to follow through with the task. And that's why I say, I do think there's always a pattern. I think that the pattern is not obvious. So I always say to people, parents, teachers, everyone, I'm not worried until it's a pattern. Kids have off days, teachers have off days, parents have off days. But if more times than not, this child is resisting, I prefer to use the word resist, because that's what they're doing. They're resisting getting started. They're resisting writing, like whatever they think. Okay, so why are they resisting? Something doesn't feel smooth and solid to them. They can do it if all the stars are aligned and they're rested and they feel good, and that kid that maybe has not been kind to them is absent that day. I mean, it could be tiny little things like that. It could be the time of day. It could be, there's a new baby at home. I mean, it could be anything that throws them off. But if the stars are aligned and they can do it one day, that doesn't mean they can do it every day. When a kid can do something every day, it's completely mastered. And when they're doing it inconsistently, it's still emerging. And so this is the question I always ask parents and teachers. If it's an inconsistent skill, what happened on the day that they were successful? What happened? Were they rested? What time of day was it? Did they definitely take their meds? Was the timing helpful with when they took their medication? Had they just eaten? What went right? And let's figure out that pattern and replicate it.
I do think that's important. Dr. Now, I'm a big fan of his. He always said, well, how did you do it?
Yeah.
Right. Like really thinking through, when you say those stars are aligned, what are those stars?
Yeah.
Like, how did they line up? And let's figure this out. Maybe we could
tell me about that. We could talk about what's not working all day long. And I think we're wired like that as humans, of like, tell me, we're problem solvers. Tell me the problem. I'll solve the problem. But it's a very medical model of like, what's the problem? I'm going to diagnose what's happening and then come up with a recommendation. But I always want to get ahead of it. I want to reverse engineer it. I want to figure out, how did we do that? Let's do more of it. Let's make it happen more often. And if they're doing it maybe with this teacher and not that teacher, why are they doing it with that teacher? Is it the subject? Is it the task? Is it the relationship? Is it the time of day? All these things are what get me out of bed in the morning to problem solve.
You and I can nerd out
Yep.
all day. It's really exciting
Yeah.
to learn the why. And when we get excited about it, we can really, again, check ourselves when we're starting to get upset and dysregulated, right? So you and I have some pretty cool things to share with everyone. First, the ADHD Summit. It is going to be available on Monday, October 17th, starting at 8 a.m. for 4 days. And we are covering so much goodness. Diagnosing, medical, physical, school, behavior, home. I mean, it's in there. And Emily, you have joined us for the ADHD Summit, where you are talking about the neurodivergent classroom, which is really exciting. And this kind of pieces together with what we're talking about today. So I'm going to have in the show notes a link for you to go and sign up for the ADHD Summit. It is not going to be available for long, so do not wait. Go do that now before you forget, because I know you have a lot on your plate. So make sure to go to the show notes and sign up for the ADHD Summit now. Again, it's online and it's free. Now, Emily, you have some great things for our teacher listeners.
Yes, thank you for asking. So I have a few exciting things coming up actually in the next few weeks. So I have a free video series for teachers and supporting teacher mental wellness. So it's called Beating Burnout this school year. And it actually is going to be offered the same week as the ADHD Summit, but it's all pre-recorded. So you don't have to watch it live. So if you sign up, you can sign up for that on my website at learnwithdremily.com. And what it will be is 10 to 15 minute short videos that you'll get that week in your inbox. And I'm going to teach you kind of all the mental health side of things that we all learn in terms of compassion fatigue as therapists and setting boundaries and when to notice how your students and your students' parents are really impacting your nervous system, and just to strengthen your emotional regulation toolkit. There will be a live component that Saturday morning. I believe it's the 22nd. Is that Saturday? 21st or 22nd. It's on the Saturday after that week, where we will chat with a Q&A that will be live, but it will be recorded. So if you're in a different time zone, I will record it and I'll email it to you. And then in a couple weeks, doors open for the Neurodiverse Classroom, which is my online course I'm creating for teachers, all elementary teachers, not just special education teachers. But I truly believe that all classrooms are already neurodiverse. Teachers, you just need more ideas and information and support. And this is online professional development for you. And I just want to merge all the things that I am passionate about in child psychology and cognitive development and with all of your education experience. So we cover all kinds of things like all the learning patterns of kids and teacher mental wellness, collaborating with teachers, and just creating an environment in your classroom where you are a safe space for these kids. So last week in October is when you'll be able to check out that course. So just go to learnwithdremily.com/teachers.
And everybody, I will make sure to have Emily's link for you down below. That way you can go down there and grab it. And again, we know that you're busy, and that's why the ADHD Summit and Emily's awesome series is available when you have time to jump in, because we know you're busy. We're also very busy moms too. So we get it, but we have done that for you to make it convenient. And Emily, thank you so much as always for coming on and talking with me today.
Thanks for having me, Holly.
Okay, I'll see you soon, I'm sure. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining me today. Don't forget to click that subscribe button so you don't miss any future episodes. If you like this episode, please share it with someone. It may just be what they need to watch today. If you're a parent, I'd love if you came on over and joined our Facebook group, Autism ADHD Group for Parents. If you're a therapist or educator, come on over to our group, Autism ADHD Group for Therapists and Educators. You're going to find those links right down there in the notes. Thanks so much, and I can't wait to see you in the next episode.
All content provided is protected under applicable copyright, patent, trademark, and other proprietary rights. All content is provided for informational and educational purposes only. No content is intended to be a substitute for professional medical or psychological diagnosis, advice, or treatment. Information provided does not create an agreement for service between Holly Blanc Moses Crossvine Clinical Group, the interviewee, Holly Blanc Moses LLC, and the recipient. Consult your physician regarding the applicability of any opinions or recommendations with respect to your symptoms or medical condition or the symptoms or medical condition of your family member. Children or adults who show signs of dangerous behavior toward themselves and/or others should be placed immediately under the care of a qualified professional.